So I've been on a bit of a Final Fantasy bender recently. With Final Fantasy XVI right around the corner and the Pixel remasters now on modern consoles, I really haven't been able to get enough of this series. And if there's one game in the series that really stands out as the most important title, it would be Final Fantasy VII. Now before we get too deep into this video, be sure to subscribe and turn on your bell notifications if you are a Final Fantasy fan, as my next few videos will be on this franchise. And stay tuned until the end of the video for details on a giveaway of the original Final Fantasy VII for PlayStation One. Now there is a constant debate about which Final Fantasy is better between 6 and 7, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you that 7 is definitively the better of these two games. Though I prefer it over 6, I think the art style of 7 aged like milk, and some of the more gimmicky aspects of the game could probably have been better left out. Luckily, the trilogy remake of Final Fantasy VII seems to be like it's revitalizing the title, as the first part of the remake ties Bloodborne with my favorite PlayStation 4 game of all time. And though I love the remake, this video is going to focus on my recent playthrough of the original Final Fantasy VII on the Nintendo Switch and how great of a portable experience this game is. At 10 years old, I was a weird kid putting random videos, flash games, and songs I liked on my MySpace page. One day I stumbled across a fan-made music video for My December by Linkin Park using cutscenes from Final Fantasy VII. I didn't know anything about the game other than the title at this point, but I remember how well certain legendary cutscenes fit that somber music. This led to me looking up more information about the game, watching gameplay videos, reviews, and honestly becoming pretty obsessed with the storyline. I even bought the movie Final Fantasy Advent Children on the PSP and probably watched it about 100 times growing up. But sadly, other than my PSP, I only had Nintendo consoles and had no way of playing it myself. When I finally got a PS2, I did however accidentally rent Dirge of Cerberus thinking it was the original Final Fantasy VII. What a disappointment that was. I played a little bit of Final Fantasy X and 12 on the PS2, but those games are really long and pretty difficult. And not even being a teenager yet, I wasn't really able to progress very far. A few years later, I played through Final Fantasy XIII on the Xbox 360, and it's actually an excellent game despite what people say. Around this time, I also played through the first Final Fantasy on the PSP. That was when I started to really understand and appreciate the franchise. Two completely different games that almost seemed to have nothing in common, but captivated me in the same way using brilliant storytelling and great RPG mechanics. At that point, it was a few years since I'd given any thought to Final Fantasy VII. By then, the game had been out for almost 15 years, and those memories I had of it as a child got swept under the rug. Though it wasn't too long after that rumors of a remake started circulating around the web, and again my interest was piqued. One day when my brother and I were buying DLC for Rock Band, I saw Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation Store, and I was ecstatic. After so many years, I was finally going to have the chance to play it. So after saving up my allowance for a few weeks, I made the $20 plunge, and honestly, I hated it. Don't get me wrong, the combat portion was amazing right off the bat, but those graphics and that art style made the game extremely hard for me to enjoy. I somewhat knew what to expect, having spent most of my childhood playing Ocarina of Time and Pokemon Yellow, but Final Fantasy VII was different. The old Pokemon games are still easy to play because of their 2D pixel art style. Ocarina of Time used an intuitive camera angle that follows you around, similar to Mario 64 and a lot of other N64 games. Final Fantasy VII was Square's first attempt at a 3D Final Fantasy game, and it really showed. The fixed camera that I've grown to love in Final Fantasy games gave me tons of problems, and honestly, just prevented me from giving the game a fair chance. Knowing that the remake was in the works, I decided to hold off until it was released. Who would have guessed that the remake would take another 10 years to actually finally come out? So in 2020, after many years of patiently waiting, I finally got Final Fantasy Remake for the PS4 and almost instantly fell in love with the story all over again. The game somehow felt like revisiting weird obscure parts of my childhood, mixed with honestly one of the best combat systems I have ever experienced in a video game. I often hear complaints about how Square Enix is milking their cash cow by making it into a trilogy, but really the remake allowed me to experience the first chunk of the game in a way that just wasn't possible with the original. The animations, voice acting, soundtrack, it's all near perfect, but after spending probably over 100 hours playing it, and knowing that it's only less than 1/3 of the whole Final Fantasy VII story, my anticipation was way too high to wait for part 2 of the remake. As a now 25-year-old who has played hundreds of other retro games, I decided to give the original Final Fantasy VII a try again, but this time on the Nintendo Switch, and to say my experience was different than the last time would be a massive understatement. Thanks to the remake, I already knew what the first third of the game's story held, but seeing it in a different light with the hardware limitations of the PlayStation One was absolutely awesome. I actually really commend Square Enix's ability to take such a small portion of the original game and expand it into 30 plus hours of highly entertaining content that doesn't really feel stretched out. Aside from now being 25 years old, what I think really made the playing experience different this time around was playing the game on the Nintendo Switch. Out of my 40 or so hour journey, more than half of it was spent playing in handheld mode, and this game honestly feels like it was made to be played in handheld. Of course, that's just because it's over 25 years old, but regardless of the reason, it just works so well playing it on the Switch OLED. When you're not plugged into a 60-inch 4K HD TV, all of a sudden the weird graphics and the half 2D, half 3D art style doesn't look so bad. The turn-based combat system brought me back to the good old days of playing Pokemon Gold on the Game Boy Color. You also have the option of playing at 3 times speed, which makes navigating the large open world a much more enjoyable experience. I've spent some of this video ripping on the graphics of the original Final Fantasy VII, but parts of the game really are gorgeous. Now I don't mean gorgeous in the same way as Elden Ring when you first walk out into the open world. What I mean is the game is such an impressive use of the extremely limited hardware it was released on. I absolutely love a good cutscene that helps tell a story, and Final Fantasy VII is full of them. It's one of those games where the cutscenes are as enjoyable as the gameplay itself, and that's not a bad thing. I consider it more of an experience than just a traditional video game. What makes Final Fantasy VII amazing is hard to put into words. I can make a video breaking down the storyline of Cloud Strife, his love triangle, and the betrayal of his mentor. That storyline captivated me as a child 10 years after its release without me having to even play it, but that story has been told 1,000 times, and it alone isn't what makes the game so special. The massive open world with near full freedom was groundbreaking for its time. In fact, they needed 3 discs to fit it all. The characters are all unique and lovable in their own way, making you feel a deep care for the outcome of the game. The soundtrack perfectly blends with the gameplay. There are so many reasons it was the first Final Fantasy to really break through to the mainstream in the West, and it became a hit for even non-RPG fans. My experience with Final Fantasy VII may be different than yours, but I do truly believe it is one of the most important video games of all time. I would easily put it in my top 10 all things considered, and if you're able to get past the dated graphics, this is an absolute must play. At the bare minimum, I cannot recommend playing the remake if you haven't already, because this storyline is one every person should experience at some point in their life. So now, as promised, I'm super excited to be giving away a copy of Final Fantasy VII for the PS1. This is a complete in-box package, and it's a really nice art piece even if you don't have a PlayStation 1. Such an iconic game does look really good on a shelf. If you'd like to be entering the giveaway, all you have to do is like the video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and stay tuned for more Final Fantasy and other retro gaming videos in the near future.